Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh, and thank you for joining us for a conversation. We from the Wise Life Academy would like to host probably monthly, I'm hoping, conversations with our esteemed ustads and talk about real, practical, relevant topics. And right now, there's nothing more relevant than what's going on in Palestine. And it's obviously dominating social media, is dominating our minds, our hearts. Um, Subhanallah, many of us are finding it very difficult to operate normally, finding it difficult to see those images online, finding it difficult to even sleep. I've had friends and relatives who've said, look, I can't even sleep since seeing the horrific events that are happening there. So I wanted to pick your brains, Ustad Harun. Thank you for joining us and for giving us the time to speak today. I wanted to pick your brains on how is a Muslim, a believer, supposed to react to such events, especially us observing from a distance. What is the most ideal reaction that we can possibly have to please Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala?
Bismillah, salatu wassalamu ala Rasulillah. So just to obviously give a bit of introduction, we've known each other for quite some time, Tanim, and I think over the years of even us knowing back in when we were at school and college, the Palestinian conflict was still going on then.
Yeah.
And we've grown up around and seeing this conflict going through a cycle, right? A cycle of violence. Like I said, ever since we were in school, and it predates even us being alive. So I think when you see such a cyclic nature of violence, the first thing you have to do is take a step back and really think about the problem from a couple of dimensions, right? The first is, and in the mental health sphere, they also use this model, which is the model or sphere of control and influence. And it's a helpful model because whenever you're faced with uncertain outcomes, or whenever you're faced with challenges or things that are stressful, the brain typically tries to go into fight or flight. Fight meaning to confront that issue and try to do something about it, or flight, which is I can't do anything, I need to get out of this situation. Now, where this can become quite unhealthy is if you are in constant state of fight or flight because you're focused on things that are out of your control. So what the sphere of control influence helps do is it helps you plot on a broad map of what's within your control. And what's within your control is what you can change directly. What's within your influence, things that you can suggest to change but are not ultimately in control or accountable to change. And the third is what's completely out of your control. And so once you go through this exercise, this helps you understand a level, an order of priority. Because what it allows you to do is allows you to focus on what's within your control, and it also allows you to disconnect from what is not within your control. Doesn't mean that you still don't do something about it, but you're able to then focus. So that's the first thing, I think. And growing up, this isn't just specific to the conflict of Palestine, but whenever you go through a situation, this is a reference point that what can I focus on? What's within my control? We do this in the professional sector as well. They always say, when there's layoffs or when there's problems within the industry or people going through difficulty, they say, look, focus on what you can do. What you can do, you can do good job at work, right? You can do good days job at work. But you're not in control over the things that you're not in control of, or who gets laid off. So in the same case, we're seeing these circumstances, whether globally or within your personal life, always revert back to this because it helps you know what you can do. So there's a really a good story that one of my teachers mentioned, because the reaction when you start to apply these is you start to become hopeless because you start to change something that you don't have direct influence or control over. So it can lead to apathy, it can lead to extremism, it can lead to loads of different harmful mindsets. So one of our teachers was saying the type of mindset you need. It's a teaching story. It's about a boy who, I think, I can't remember what type of it. I think it's shellfish or something gets taken out, gets beached on the ocean, and they die. I think starfish. That's it. Starfishes, and they die when they're out of the ocean for some period of time. They dry up. So thousands of starfish are beached on the beached on the sea, on the coast, and he's picking them up one by one and throwing them. And a man sees it and says, "What's the point of doing that? You can't save them all. You're not making a difference to them all." And he picks up one and he says, "Well, I made a difference to this one."
Yeah.
So that's the mindset that a person should have, that even if the problems look big, that you start with what you can control, and even if that's small, because the assessor is, unlike when you do an exam or you work at a company, they care about sales, they care about volume. Individual effort is accounted for, but really they want to see impact.
Yeah.
But the system of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala which is the Islamic worldview. Our world system is very different. Our worldview is very different to, say, a materialist, capitalist worldview, which is around maximizing profits, minimizing, pain and labor. Our system is very different. It's actually the opposite. Allah accounts for individual effort over outcome. Completely opposite. And so if you try to impose a kind of materialist, capitalist mindset on your life, then yeah, you're definitely going to see yourself as, I haven't done enough, or what I've done is not making a difference, because you look at it as numbers, right? Margins. But actually, in the court of Allah, even the smallest acts can be great because it's based on individual effort, circumstance. So going back to what your question was, how do we react? It's a multi-dimension question. And like I said, the first thing is knowing what's within your control, what's not within your control. Once you accept that the first thing that's within your control is yourself, then you can start to formulate, how do I react? Because now you need to know, what is the reaction for me as an individual? How do I react to the circumstances I see? And then what can I do to change those circumstances? They're the two dimensions. Does that make sense? Yeah, so that's my...
So it's less so like, what can we do to stop the conflict or to save lives? It's like, what effort can I make? What is within my power? Am I doing the best that I can, regardless of what impact that has? So do we just sort of neglect the impact part of the equation and just focus on the effort, or is there still a link?
Yeah, so you do two things, isn't it? So are we able to pause on that? Are we able to pause?
It's less.
Okay, fine. So there's two parts of that. One is, the first is, I said that it's not about neglecting the problem. The first is what you can do as an individual. So with everything, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala mentions, الَّذِي خَلَقَ الْمَوْتَ وَالْحَيَاةَ لِيَبْلُوَكُمْ أَيُّكُمْ أَحْسَنُ عَمَلًا. That life and death is created in cycles to reveal who is best amongst you. So interestingly, we talked about cycle, and we talked about this conflict being like a cycle, and what cycle of violence, cycle of oppression is happened throughout the ages. The Quran our reference points are full of stories of oppression. People who've come from oppression, been freed from oppression, whether it's Pharaoh or Fir'aun or any of the stories of the Quran. So the purpose of that is that there's a personal lesson for you in that. There's a personal lesson for you in that. And history will say that as well, even with the Palestine conflict. Well, I shouldn't say even what's happening in Palestine. It's happened throughout ages. Whether it was the reconquest of Salah ad-Din, or even prior to that, when it wasn't under Muslim rule in the Prophet's time. So you see that how did the prophets, how did they react when they saw circumstances like this? And that it was always to rectify the self first. And that's where we're missing the step a little bit, because the obvious step is to try to change what you see. Right? That's the obvious. But if you're not changing it in the process, then you haven't really benefited from the circumstance, right? Because our belief is that a believing, dynamic person can benefit from all circumstances. This is what the statement of the Prophet is. When a calamity happens, he is patient. When he said, "How amazing is it the affairs of a believer are? Whenever the goodness is bestowed, he's thankful. Whenever it's hardship, he's patient. He's benefiting in all circumstances." And so that's the place that you want to be, not depressive, losing hope, getting extreme, because you're only focused on the external reaction, because you've missed this part. How is it the case that you can you express patience? How do you express gratitude in difficulty? That's the question that we should ask, because then you can then unlock, okay, what is the internal reaction that we had? And we shouldn't undervalue that. We shouldn't undervalue that, because ultimately that is what that's what you're going to be accounted for, which is your earth, right? Your earth and your land, and which is your internal world, right? Right.
So you're saying that seeing what's going on in the world should actually lead us to look internally.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
A lot of people will have a problem with something like this. It's like children are dying, innocent people are dying. What do you mean, change yourself? How's that going to help?
So it's both, isn't it? So it's both. So you start with you start with yourself, and in parallel you change what you see. They both come hand in hand, and the best example is if you look at the prophetic seerah. The Prophet ﷺ in his lifetime, forget Jerusalem being under occupation, Makkah was under occupation of the polytheists, and Jerusalem at the time was under occupation, right, by non-Muslims. The Prophet was also under sanctions, right? The sanctions were so bad that the first martyr within Islam was the Prophet's son, because out of malnutrition. And then Sayyidah Khadija Kubra anha, she passed away because she wasn't able to recover from the sanctions and the poverty and the lack of food and resource they were able to have. So this is not new. But what did the Prophet respond? Was it to take up arms? Was it to even curse the Quraysh? No. It got to such a point where once their life was in threat, then they did the migration to Medina. So the Prophet ﷺ gives a very amazing example and a model that actually the initial part was around self-transformation. Now, that doesn't mean that they didn't say that you can't intervene and stop others being oppressed, of course. But the core of it was the transformation of the companions and transformation in belief. And that is interesting, because if you look at the Meccan verses, vast majority are not to do with ahkam or laws or what you should do and shouldn't do. It's all to do with what? Belief in afterlife. Who are you? Who is God? Why am I here? What's the purpose of creation? Why do bad things happen to good people? Why do good things happen to bad people? All to do with core beliefs and transforming the belief system. Until that's transformed, you can't really arrive to societal justice, because that's based on having these things there. For example, you couldn't mandate punishment if everybody is drinking. First, something has to change in order for people to accept that, right? Otherwise, you're going to kill off half the population overnight. So, in this same case, we see this in that prophetic era, and it's really amazing, because once you look at the seerah in this dimension, you end up seeing that every circumstance is covered within the seerah. Whether it's a conflict, whether it's a household issue, whether it's a neighbor issue, everything is covered in the seerah of the Prophet ﷺ, which is a miracle, right? So, going back to your point, what I'm suggesting is not you see this conflict and just focus on yourself. What I'm suggesting is, the question is, what do I do as an individual? The first thing you do is, right, if you see oppression, you adopt whatever means you can, whether it's through your political, social, that. And I don't even think I need to say that, because it's so well understood. Alhamdulillah, our community is very engaged in that, charitable, whatever. Then it comes to the individual. This is where things go complicated, because we see these over and over again, and we engage in these good acts over and over, which is great. But then ourselves, we're dying, we're spiritually dying, we're mentally being checked out. So there's something going wrong there at that level. So what I'm addressing is what to do at that stage. Do you understand? It's like seeing, let's say you're seeing, there's, as an example, let's say there's people in poverty, they can't eat. So your focus is to feed the people, but you forget to feed yourself. You forget that you also have a stomach. So what's going to happen? You'll feed people all day 1, day 2, day 3. Eventually, you won't even have enough energy to leave the house. And so we're also reaching like a spiritual, mental fatigue, because we've just focused on the activism, but actually missed the part of, this is also identifying that we have some things to work on. We have things to work on. I know that, look, the people who they're going through oppression and difficulty, and yes, you should do what you can, like, what you can with your hands, what you can do with your speech, and what you can't change, you should hate at least in your heart. But beyond that, they're going through what they're going through. You're also going to go through what you're going through. You're not in that circumstance, so you should ask yourself, what am I doing with the talents and abilities that I have to make things better? Not just this issue, better, period. Does that make sense? Because Islam is the idea that wherever you go, you bring peace to that environment. So we're not in Palestine, but we can help try to influence it. But where we are, we should be establishing peace. If I'm creating hell here and I'm trying to establish peace elsewhere, then I've got mixed up. If I've got hell in my household, but I'm trying to establish peace on the other side of the world, what would you say to that person? Yeah.
So the young UK-based Muslim who's seeing what's going on in Palestine, how can they most benefit from that situation?
Yeah, now we're getting to the crux of what is it that we do to benefit. So I mentioned, there's models of thinking around control and influence, but specifically within control, what you're in control over is your actions, your belief system. So first of all, actually understanding the first question people have, which they don't articulate, is why do bad things happen? We might not say it, but really deep down we're thinking
why the Palestinians keep getting the short end of the stick over and over and over and over.
And also, where's the justice of Allah? Where's the justice of Allah? Allah is a just being. And so the first thing I'd say is to first really interrogate why you're here. Because seeing death does something to you, right? It gives you a wake-up call. It's strange because death is the only thing that's guaranteed.
The only certainty.
It's the only certainty. Everything else is not certain. So we should be amazed at those things, but we're not. We treat them as normal. Someone gets a job, someone has children. It's normal. But death, we're shocked because it forces you out of your reference point. That, hold on, you're in autopilot mode. I'm going to have kids, work, job. I need to do this every day, my errands. And then you're forced to, hold on, it can all end. So what was this all about? So when you're seeing oppression, when you're seeing people dying in the thousands, you've got to ask yourself, they didn't have the things that I had, they didn't have the aspirations I had, they weren't able to fulfill them, and they're gone. So what do we say about them? What did their life mean? Was it just to grow up in a prison, just open a prison, and then be murdered? Because that is the conclusion you end up arriving to if you look at it through that view. So the first thing is you have to interrogate why. And it goes back to having a reference point. The reference point, we obviously, as Muslims, we look at things through our Quranic reference point, what was given to Revelation, what was given to the prophets. And the first thing is that this arena, I mentioned the verse in Surah Mulk, that life and death was created. Interesting, it talks about life and death. Could have said anything else. It said life and death and the cycle of it, because it knows death is not referring to just people or you dying, it's referring to people and witnessing death as well, and the birth of life. So the cycle that you observe is there to reveal what's within you. It's what's within you. And what's within you is what you need to correct. It could be a wrong mindset, it could be a bad quality, it could be the idea that you think that you're going to live forever, although you don't say it, but actually you act like it. So going back to what we were discussing about what can you do, the first is to interrogate that question. Once you start to interrogate that question, then you're able to get clarity on why we're here. So very simply, the Quran kind of categorizes 4 types of people, and why do good things happen to good people? Why do bad things happen to bad people? Which are the obvious. Then the opposite, why do good things happen to bad people? And why do bad things happen to good people? Right? These are the ones that we're really interested in. So just to summarize, so good things happen to good people. The Quran talks about people are rewarded when they do good. Okay. Bad things happen to bad people. It also mentions that we wrong ourselves. That Allah doesn't wrong anybody.
It's your fault.
Harm comes from the result of our own wrongdoing. Okay. So those are known. Now let's get to these 2, right? Because these will help us understand these things. So the second, I mentioned. Good things happen to bad people, bad things happen to good people. Bad things happen to good people for many reasons. One can be, let's take the case of the pious and righteous. It's there to elevate them. It's there to increase them in the knowledge of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. It's there to raise them in rank. Because it's through those tests they get more insight into God. Right? Let's take the Prophet as an example. Obviously, prophets are infallible, so their tests are not done because of their own example or their own shortcomings. It's because Allah raises them. So, Taif, the Prophet ﷺ is berated, blood is filling their shoes. And at that point, they're offered to enact God's justice. and they refuse not to. And it's in that moment the Prophet reflects mercy at a very high level. Now, the Prophet had to be put in that circumstance to reflect that, right?
Yeah.
So that's for the pious and righteous. For those other reasons, bad things can happen to good people. There are many, like removal of expiation of past mistakes, past sins. Could also be, like I mentioned, to improve oneself. Something might come out and you realize it's wrong. Like who wouldn't want a doctor to tell them, I've done a health checkup on you and there's something wrong there. That doesn't mean you're an evil person. It means that it's a health test, it's a checkup. Similarly, the world is created to check you, right? Check your physical, intellectual, emotional, psychological health, and it's only done that through circumstance. That's the only means. That's the only scan. So that's one reason. Why do good things happen to bad people? That's an interesting one. So we are surrounded by, in the business world, people might not outwardly have religion, faith, even be, have
morality.
immoral, completely immoral. But they have dunya, they have money, success, outwardly, fame, all these things. And you think, whoa, the people who can change this Palestine situation, why are they given this authority, right? Because that's another thing, people criticizing the government, and that's true, they should be criticized. I'm not suggesting they shouldn't. But people want to understand why, right? The wisdom of God, Allah. So Allah mentions, and it's mentioned in the Quran as well. I'm not mentioning the actual specific verse, but I'm giving you the interpretation of it, which is the idea that when people are doing wrong, right? We have this saying, it's in Urdu, but I'll say, basically you give somebody string. It's like a mousetrap.
Yeah.
The cheese is on the mousetrap, right? It's meant to look attractive. But you're not seeing the trap part, which is when
it's gonna get you
cut, when you get cut. And it always ends that way, typically. Those who are deluded or diverted by this world, they have very sudden loss. It's a very sudden, and it happens quickly, and happens without warning. So these things can happen as well. It could happen in many circumstances. So we should never look at them and think, oh, that's like looking at the mouse eating the cheese, but not seeing the trap that's come just above them. Do you understand? So that's also, so the Quran gives this reference point, and it's very useful because, like you said, what's the first thing we do? We first have to correct the belief system, because that's where the Prophet started, which is how do we view these events? Because if we're viewing them wrong, talking about what I should change in my day-to-day, that's going to be skewed, because you're always going to view the world while we're here incorrectly. Does that make sense?
So you're excuse me, you're taking, it's a question of perspective, I guess, then. Having the right perspective, and having the right lens in which we look. So where have we gone wrong with our perspective, generally speaking, the average Muslim?
That's a good question. As in perspective of
So do we have the right perspective, first and foremost? Most of us, laymen like myself, do we have the right perspective? Because when we look at what's going on in Palestine, we feel frustrated, we feel anger, we feel sadness, and then it kind of stops there. The inner work is not happening. So what perspective is it that we're missing?
Yeah, so like I said, the first thing is understanding why we're here. What's the purpose of being here? Getting clarity on that. So I discussed, understanding that people are different states and things happen for different reasons. But in summary, we're here because, just like a university, we're here to develop something. That developing consists of two things. Whenever you study a discipline or subject, you want to develop two things. One is you want to filter out the mistakes. That's why you do mock exams. That's why you do mock, because you want to make the mistake so you can filter them out. And the second is you want to develop proficiency in something, a skill in something. You want to be very good at something, and that's the equation: is less mistakes, more of doing good. Yeah. So that's the same with us. We're in this world, and we've got two mechanisms. One is any circumstance is revealing two things. One is it's revealing a fault, or it's revealing something good. If it's revealing a fault, you need to be able to learn how to remove that. And if it's revealing something good, you need to know how to develop that to benefit yourself and others. That's it. And so this world is, that's what the verse says. The word comes from bala. Bala is when you put something over, cloth over something and the color comes through. It's revealing the nature of something, which isn't apparent. And so within us, we have emotions, thoughts. And so when we see these circumstances, that's the circumstance where something's coming out. So to feel frustration, anger is a good thing. That's not bad. These are not bad emotions. But to see your shortcoming, for example, let's say people are passing away, they're dying, they're being murdered. It should help you evaluate where you are in your life. What are you prioritizing? Are you prioritizing the right things? Because if that person died at the age of 5, mostly children, and you've been given longer life, what are you doing with your life? What happens when you come to that point in your life? Don't assume that you're going to hit 60, 70, 80. We don't know. We've got parents burying their children, not children burying their parents. So there's a message in that. It's a wake-up call, which is you're not in an occupied land. You have freedom. You're not being restricted. How are you benefiting others? How are you making a difference within your sphere of influence? Your sphere of influence is your immediate, your family, your neighbors, your community, your society. Because if everybody thinks that way, then you can achieve something, right? If everyone thinks it's someone else's problem, then you're not going to change anything. It's like if you ask 1 million people to take one step, that's 1 million steps, right? But people are going to be willing to take the step in front of them, not complain about why they're not, we haven't arrived to cross the country, right? Then nobody's taking a step, right? So it starts with baby steps. That's where I think we need to bring it back to. I think in the education system that we've had in university and school and college, we're always taught to think big picture and then work down, isn't it? Get to the position, then make the change. Get to the authority, then make the... But actually, you realize that in everything, it starts from the other way around. You have to take the steps, and you've got to change your world, and that has an effect on the world around you, and it has a butterfly effect. We forget that's how the seerah comes about. The seerah doesn't come about with, firstly, the Prophet ﷺ having ultimate authority over the Quraysh, and then going through the politics, and then implementation of quite a lot, started in people's houses and rooms in secret, and then it just expanded organically, right? And so that if everybody has that mindset to change, then I think things that, because the world outside is a reflection of our inside world as well. There has a connection between these. So the chaos that we see, that's what is mentioned in the Quran, that the facade that you see in the land and the earth is caused by you, meaning that there's a relationship there, that what you're seeing is not completely disconnected from the actions of individuals. At the end of the day, even the conflict we're seeing is individual actors behind this, right? Both sides. So I think going back to what you're saying, the missing step is we have to come to the realization that firstly, getting the clarity on the most universal questions. And I'd say the Muslims that I've met, alhamdulillah, like you've done me for years, right? Went to Islamic school. We've both been in similar circles of education. We've learnt the text, we've learnt Quran, we've learnt many Islamic disciplines. We've also been exposed to self-development world. And I think the self-development world is very good because it simplifies a lot of these frameworks. But where I think we've missed the boat is we focused on the pieces and not the puzzle. Right? If you think about religion, what religion is trying to achieve, is trying to achieve clarity in times of confusion. That's what prophets were sent. They were sent in times of chaos, not times of peace. Why? To cut through that, to give truth and clarity. It's like if a house is burning and I don't know it's burning and I'm still sitting on the sofa watching TV, you need somebody to come to me and give me the most clear, prioritized instructions of what I need to do. Get out of the house, take your belongings. Right? So I would say we're in that house, we're in that burning house, and the fire is our life diminishing, right? It's just a matter of time before it comes to us. The question is, what do we run out the house with? And so the religion gives you a prioritization of that. The first thing is you have to realize you're in a burning house. So it comes back to belief. So having clarity on who you are, clarity on where you are and why you're here, having clarity on is there a creator and who is that creator, having clarity on what's my purpose of being and my mission here, And finally, it's the how. How do I go about that journey? How do I go about the steps to actually fulfill, now that I have clarity on the why and the what, and then it's the how, right? We don't jump to the how and the why. And that's where, going back to my comment to you, is we focus on the pieces. You know, if you think about Islam is like a puzzle, right? You have pieces of the puzzle: Arabic, Quran, language, studying, different disciplines. These are pieces. They're not the puzzle, right? What do you do when you create a puzzle?
Create a picture, image,
So what's the first thing you do when you start a puzzle? You look at
all the pieces.
you look at, no, before the pieces.
You open the box.
You open the box, but what's on the box?
Instruction. Well,
No, not
what the
instructions.
full picture should look
The full
like.
picture should look like. So you have to first look at the full picture. What we've got is the pieces. Okay, this piece is, and then we create our own pictures.
Yeah.
So completely different pictures. That's why, you know, you get. I can't talk on behalf of everybody about where everything should come, but I can only say generally what I've observed. The people have DIY'd their pieces. When you DIY your pieces, you haven't arrived to the big picture questions. And so what we want to focus on is what are those big picture answers and questions. Why are we here? You'd be surprised. You get a varied responses from people when you ask them these questions.
Well, you've mentioned this a few times. Why am I here?
Yeah.
We need to ask that question. And you've answered it by saying that we're here to develop something. But the average Muslim will say that we're here to worship the Creator. We're not here to develop something.
Right. Yeah, so that's a very typical example. It's a verse that's thrown around. وَمَا خَلَقْتُ الْجِنَّ وَالْإِنسَ إِلَّا لِيَعْبُدُونَ. I was only created jinn and man except to worship me. But you have to interrogate that further. Obviously, we know that the Quran has an infinite number of wisdoms, and we access that through knowledge and through interpretation. And the interpretation, very famous interpretation of Ibn Abbas, radiallahu ta'ala anhu, who was a companion and a cousin of the Prophet ﷺ, and also was a mufassir among the companions, so he has this gift of interpretation more than others. And he refers to the worship as illa liya'rifun, to know God, to know Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And to know Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is to reflect His qualities. Because you can't knowing something, it's like I can know, I can study what wetness is when water goes on something molecularly. I can study it. But I really know when I put my finger in the water. I've got a gnosis of it. Similarly, I can know what having a flu is by reading, you know, online Wikipedias. But I really know when I got the flu. And funny enough, what's written on these Wikipedia and documents is only arrived to because people got this illness and reported on what they experienced. So it actually comes from experiential knowledge. So to know Allah is to worship Allah, because every act of worship is a reflection of God's quality, to be truthful, to be charitable, to be kind to one another. All of these qualities can be rooted back to a quality of Allah, and it all comes back to the creation of the human being. The human being was created as a Khalifa. Khalifa doesn't just mean political leadership or custodianship of the earth. Khalifa literally means representative. To represent something means that there has to be some similitude or reflection of the thing that you're representing. The reason why MPs are resigning is because their views are not being represented in the positions or parties that they're ascribed to now. So they can't represent them. Simple. There's a misalignment. So similarly, we're here as representatives of Allah, meaning that we can reflect His qualities in the world, just like He reflects His mercy, His forgiveness, and we expect that all from God. But we have to also be able to internalize that and reflect that on others. And if you're unable to, then it's like getting lots of good stuff from Allah, but you're not able to give that to anybody else. But you expect it from God. Everyone expects goodness and mercy and kindness and
forgiveness.
But if you can't give that to others, you can't. Firstly, that's why these acts are worship. This is the secret behind deeds, right? Doing any deed, working a good profession, working a good job, being an entrepreneur. Why are they good? They're not good because you know what you do with them. It's actually they're good in themselves because within them there are traits which are reflective of God's attributes. Being an honest trader, being an entrepreneur, helping others, you know, having a mission in life. These are all rooted in good qualities of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Does that make sense? So going back to you said about what's the purpose of being here? Allah outlines that. We don't need to outline it for ourselves. Allah outlines that we created a Khalifa. and that Khalifa is a representative of mine. That's what Khalifa means. So the question now is, how do you represent Allah? And that's where وَمَا خَلَقْتُ الْجِنَّ وَالْإِنسَ إِلَّا لِيَعْبُدُونَ, that I created man and jinn to worship me. Worship is to reflect God's quality, to manifest God's qualities. Does that make sense?
Well, I'm hearing this for the first time. To worship God is to reflect God's qualities. Many people haven't heard this before, so can you substantiate that a little bit more?
Yeah, no problem. Any quality of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala can be is reflected in any act of worship or goodness that we say is a good deed. Like I gave the example, charity. What makes charity good? Other than the utility, because some people say, oh, something is good because of the benefit it brings. Not necessarily. Let's take Sawm, for example, fasting. What makes the act of not eating and drinking worship?
The pain, the sacrifice, the pain, and the effort.
Okay, that doesn't make it worship. I can sacrifice for something bad. Meaning that it's not based on the utility or the benefit that's been brought, and it's not necessarily. One person might say because God said so. That's true as well, because Allah said so. But if you want to interrogate that further and know the wisdom behind that, that's what we're talking about. Because obviously everything ends when you say God says so. Yeah, okay, you follow what Allah says, and that's what guidance is there for.
That's what we do.
And that's what you should do. That irrelevant if you understand or don't.
Yeah.
But if you want to develop a deeper understanding, then you have to ask yourself, okay, let's take this example of fasting. God doesn't eat and drink.
So we're reflecting that
To a human level. When we say reflection, I want to make it clear. Nothing is akin to God. God's is infinite, his attributes and qualities. We refer to reflection in meaning, not in status or power or these aspects. Meaning. So, when I say this person's forgiving, obviously you're not saying it's the same as God's forgiveness. But in meaning, there's an ascription there to say that, okay, he's reflecting this quality of what it means to forgive. Yeah, what it means to forgive, right? At their level. So, does that make sense? So, any act of worship. And all the rituals are in Islam because people have restricted worship to the rituals. All the 5 pillars are in Islam is training on how to develop those qualities. Doing zakat every year. Right? If it hasn't made you a generous person, what's the point of giving zakat? Right? Defeats the purpose. If zakat hasn't taught you you should think about apportioning money. Because zakat is a right of the poor in you, not you giving out of charity. It's a right of the poor. So it should get you to think about having empathy of how others have rights upon you. That's what the zakat is teaching you, isn't it? If you think about it, if you don't pay zakat, you've withheld the right of somebody else on you. So there's a deep lesson in that. It's getting you to think empathetically. When I'm in a room, what are the rights of others upon me in this circumstance? As opposed to, I come in a room, what can others do for me? So take attitude versus it flips it. So that's, for example, that's zakat. Then there's hajj, then there's fasting, then there's prayer. Prayer is a training. You do it 5 times a day minimum, right? What are you being trained from that salah? The successful the believers, those who establish a quality in the prayer. You didn't just say those who pray.
For sure.
Khushu, there are different interpretations of that, but khushu, one of them is humility, one of them is presence, meaning that prayer should leave you with a quality. If it's empty, you've walked out the shop with nothing.
Just a ritual.
Yeah, it's completely empty. So, going back to your point around, to substantiate it, that's the whole religion. The whole religion is. If you ask me what this jumper is made out of, it's made out of different fabrics that are woven. So the whole religion, the weaving is a weaving of God's qualities, Allah's qualities, and by engaging in these acts of worship, not only is it beneficial for you and society and it's rewardable, but you become the real dimension is you come to know God through those actions. Like, if you've gone through the difficulty of having to forgive somebody who doesn't deserve your forgiveness, then you get an insight into God's forgiveness to people who have denied God or done very heinous things like murder, and you think they don't deserve forgiveness, but Allah forgives them.
You don't know until you taste it.
You don't know. That's it. That's the thing. The journey to knowing God is an experiential journey, and when you see life like that, it completely repivots the way you see events, difficulties, challenges, setbacks, because now the world becomes a way of knowing God now. The world becomes a mechanism of knowing yourself first, and then knowing God. Because you can know things through opposites. God is God. Creation is creation. God is unlimited. The creation is limited. God is uncreated. The creation is obviously is created. So just like you can know heat through knowing cold, you can know God through the creation. Allah is just. Human beings are not just. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is equitable. Human beings are not equitable. So by knowing the opposite, you come to know that you fit with God. This is why the verse says, وَمَا خَلَقْتُ الْجِنَّ وَالْإِنسَ إِلَّا لِيَعْبُدُونَ. Except this, meaning that there's no other exception. There's no other exception outside of this, meaning that you only fit with God. Right? There's no other reason for your being. You're only created to fit with God. You're only created to come to know Allah. And it's coming, when you come to know something, that's when you realize you fit. It's like marriage, right? There's a knowing process, and then you're compatible, and then you commit. Same with Allah, that journey of knowing them, it doesn't end. It doesn't end. That's why the prophets were tested the most, because they knew Allah. They knew Allah the most. So going back to the circumstances we're going through, the prophets were there as examples for us, not so that we can look at them and say they're prophets and we're not. So the question is, why are we not able to achieve, not appreciate we were not tested, not be tested the same as the prophets, because no one was tested more than them, but the companions are a great reflection of having that certainty and belief. They've gone through that transformation, and so we also have to go through that journey of transformation of how do we build ourselves, our internal selves, so we can respond to events external, in our external world, in our internal world, in our lives, so that we are benefiting from these circumstances. And ultimately, we're coming to know Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala through those circumstances, whether it's for removing deficiency in us, or it's about improving and finding our mission in our life. So these are the things that we teach retreats. We've been teaching them for every quarter. And the real purpose of these 2-day retreats is we go away, and they're designed for non-Muslims, Muslims, people who've been in the religion and faith, or teach even in the teaching capacity for years, and really want to get back to getting clarity on these existential questions, because once you yourself have clarity, you can help others get clarity, right? Without having to do lengthy study and 10 years of Arabic. Not that that's not good, that's good, but that's the focusing on the pieces approach. Let's focus on the picture, and then you can work backwards and specialize in whatever it is you want to specialize in, but you have a reference point, right? So that's what we teach in these retreats, and myself and a couple of others, we've been teaching this. We had a retreat in Qatar as well. We took some people out, 4 or 5 high-performing professionals, and we went through the quest for meaning. So really, focusing and doubling down on these questions, and then focusing on how your professional life fits within this, your marital life, all the aspects of your life. Because remember, you read most of self-development books, it starts with these aspects. What you can see, your money, your family. But actually, our reference point's even broader than that, because we believe in the afterlife. We believe in the life that came before, right? Meaning in alim arwah. So our reference point is even broader than starting with, okay, bucket your current life. Do you understand? So as people of faith, we also have to go back to what our reference points are. That's not to say there isn't things to benefit in the self-development world, but I think you need to have the right reference point. So this is what we kind of cover in these retreats. We try to take people on this journey.
What you're saying makes complete sense. What I'm not so clear on is the how. You mentioned about how to live a life that leads you to knowing God better, how to truly reflect God's qualities. The how seems to be the big question mark that many of us are still looking for.
Yeah. The how, like I said, the how is pretty clear. So how do you go about, like I said, once you've got clarity on who you are first, right? Your body, your physical being, your intellectual being, your moral being, meaning the heart. You're an emotional being, you have the nafs, and then the spirit, the ruh, which is your reality. So once you know who you are, what you are, and that you're a Khalifa, you're here to represent God and His qualities, and to represent means to reflect His qualities. You're aware that you fit with God and you don't fit with anybody else, and that's who we were created for. We weren't created for anybody else or any other being. And thirdly, that the world is here to help us develop these qualities and expose us where we need help, and also develop us where we need development. If the world has been designed that way, It's like going to university. You know, when you go to university, there's always some people who party. There's people who don't do exams. There's people who don't study and go to any lectures and they cram. I mean, me and you know this better than anybody. We cram before the exam. Now, you wouldn't look at the person who crams and say, oh, why did the university do this to them? They did it to themselves. They put difficulty in themselves, but they still have to sit the test. So everybody walks away university with different things. Some people no degree, some people third class, some people have to retake their years, whatever. That's dependent on how you leverage the situation. But the university is a university. It's there to prepare you for something greater. It's there ideally for you to launchpad your life. Same. This world is here to launchpad your life into the next. And that launchpad is, we mentioned, is to, and it's generally covered within the science of tazkiyah or purification, which is the idea that whether you choose to do it with your volition or not, you're going to go through it. It's like whether you choose to study or not, you're going to sit the exam. So the smart person is the one who studies.
Yeah.
The less smart person is the one that crams, and the one who doesn't study at all and just turns up on exam day, well, there you go.
They're going to fail.
Yeah. So, or they might cheat, who knows. So, and then you learn nothing, right? You might pass the exams, but you have no qualities. So when it comes to your job, when it comes to your job, if you don't know, you start an accounting degree and you don't know anything about accounting, but you've done amazing in the exams, you're going to be exposed at work.
You're in trouble.
You're going to be exposed at work. So in the same case, right, in this life, you're here to achieve something. And those qualities are what require, it admits you into the afterlife. And the afterlife is where the knowing of God continues. Now, your question about how, there's two types of, like I mentioned, students. One, where you're reactionary. So life's going to purify you. And that life is the harshest teacher. Right? Life will humble you. Life will force you in circumstances that you don't want, because through those circumstances you develop something, right? But then there's those who take it on their volition, meaning they take the ownership of themselves and say, no, I'm going to improve myself. I'm going to go through this process. And so that comes into the science or the process of purification. And this is what the prophets taught. Every prophet taught this, relevant of revelation. And specifically the Prophet ﷺ taught this on the first 10 years, which is how do I transform the companions before salah, before fasting, before hajj, before any of these acts of worship. So there's a process of transformation, and that has been documented in many books, but it's been practicalized in these retreats. So we have a whole system where it breaks down how do you go through that system of transformation, because that's what we're missing, the how. Right? Let's say you even have clarity on these. Okay, you still need to engage in a process. So you still need to be able to engage in a process that changes your actions, changes your thoughts, changes your behaviors, changes your character, changes your emotional states. And it's when you're able to refine these and reflect God's attributes in these aspects of you, that's when you're able to obtain what we call closeness to God. Closeness doesn't mean in physicality, it means in resemblance, meaning in connection through these qualities of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala that you're able to reflect in your life. So this how we teach it in the retreat in more detail.
So there's an actual system or there's an actual process. There is.
There's a process. Tazkiyah is very simple to understand, the principles of it. Sometimes it gets translated to purification, but actually tazkiyah, just like it comes from the same root of zakat, which is to grow something. To purify and also to grow. So using the example of, like, if you've ever done gardening, Tanim, I don't know if you have, to do some gardening, you have to do a couple of things. One is you de-weed, and then you make the soil fertile.
So you remove the bad stuff.
You remove the bad stuff.
And then you try and make
the soil ready to make it ready and for it to grow. If you treat the soil or you treat the plant while there's weeds, it has very limited effect. The other weeds will take the nutrition and also kill the plant. So that's pretty much the process of purification, and it's done through repetition, because just like growing a plant, you water it once. What do you have to do? Continuously. Every day. It needs sunlight, it needs water, it needs sunlight, it needs water, until it then bears fruit. So purification is two things. One is repetition of something until it's installed within you. So we all know what good and bad is broadly. So how do we install the knowledge of something being good within us? How do I know lying is bad, but why do I still lie? Because I haven't installed the quality of truthfulness in me. So it's to repeat that act of truthfulness is to repeat the act of generosity to the extent that now you become generous. That's what the Prophet ﷺ said, that whoever, the most beloved deeds are those that are done consistently, even if they're small, because that has more of an effect on you as a person and changes you than doing one big act on, I don't know, Laylatul Qadr and then say I'm a generous person. When 364 days a year, you can't give a penny to somebody.
Because the consistency then becomes a habit, and the habit becomes who you are.
Correct.
That's powerful.
Correct. And the opposite is true. Let's say you've got something that you want to remove, an addiction, a problem, anger issues, whatever it is. Then you're also taught with structure on how to resist against that thing. And through resistance, you're able to uproot any quality that you want to get rid of. So just these two.
Is that easy?
It can become easy with the system, because the system doesn't attack the hardest things first.
Right.
Whenever if you know any strategy, whenever you want to weaken an enemy, you don't attack it up front.
You find the weakest link.
You weaken it through its sources. It's like weeds. In order to kill the weeds, you first have to kill their roots, starve them, and then it's easier to uproot them. So similarly, that's also how it's like tackling these problems. There's a soft approach, and eventually that makes it easy for you to just pull these issues out. And so there's a whole training program that allows you to do that. But before we talk about, like I said, we engage in the how, the most important thing is that you've got clarity on the why and the who and the what. Because if we talk about how immediately, I think people can benefit from purification irrelevant if they know the why and how, because the benefit is that you're developing yourself. Right? Who doesn't want to do that? But where it really becomes powerful is where you're connecting it to your why, which is the purpose of being here. Does that make sense?
So I think to wrap up this fascinating conversation and to again bring it back to the topic, we need to look at what is happening in the world with the bigger lens. The bigger lens of we're not here to stay and have a good life. We're here to be tested. We're here to develop something. We're here to gain God's closeness. And if God decides for somebody's life to be shortened, so be it. So does that, I guess, in turn means that we maybe see those babies in a different light. That was their time. That was their test. And actually, we can take solace in the fact that they now go straight to the afterlife forever and ever and ever. So they may have had 5 years of tragedy, but they now have trillion years, infinity of bliss. So can that help us have some sort of solace and inner peace when, I guess it would help me.
What you said, it reminds me of a story in the time of the Prophet ﷺ. One of his sons, I think it was Ibrahim. Sorry, Abdullah, or I think Abdullah. It was a son of Muriya, so I can't remember their exact name. But they were ill, and Muriya, she called the Prophet ﷺ once, and the companions came and said, "Oh, your son is ill. She's asked that you can visit." And the Prophet said, "Be patient." And then the second time came, and he said, "Be patient." And the third time came, he got up, and then he left, and he then went to visit them. And at that point, the Prophet's son was passing away, and the Prophet cradled his son and began to weep. And the companion said, "Ya Rasulullah, why are you weeping? Why are you weeping?" And the Prophet said that by Allah, these tears that you see, these are mercy. They're not impatience. So to feel emotion and to feel upset is a sign of an alive heart. It's a good thing.
Love.
Yeah, it's a good thing. It's not a bad thing. So that's the first thing. The second is the Prophet didn't get depressed because of that, because the belief system was there, the right belief system. So that's the first. The second is Maria then asks the Prophet ﷺ, "Why didn't you?" She asks that, look, she's obviously distraught.
Why didn't you come earlier?
Yeah, why didn't you come earlier? And also, how are you able to cope effectively? And the Prophet ﷺ says, would you like me to show you that I see him playing in the garden?
SubhanAllah.
And she says something quite amazing. She says that if you've seen it, I don't need to see it. Meaning, what you've seen is sufficient. Because of your eyes, there's more truthfulness in that. So, when you say that you see, one quality of Allah, and going back to the idea of knowing God, one quality of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is Allah's knowledge. And unlike me and you, when we interact and behave with one another, we interact based on our knowledge of what we know. But we don't know the full picture. For example, I can advise you, Tanim, take this business deal. But I don't know in 2 weeks' time you're going to fall ill. And actually that's the worst decision I could advise you, because I don't have knowledge of the future.
Yeah.
But whenever Allah deals with somebody, Allah deals with the big picture in mind. So for us to try to understand that, it becomes impossible, because we will never have the big picture in mind. But what we can do is have faith in the one who does have that.
Yeah.
Does that make sense? So definitely, to your point, in terms of the emotional response, there's nothing wrong with feeling the sadness. But going back to our reference point, that's why beliefs are important. Beliefs are so important, because it shapes how you experience the world.
Yeah.
So I gave an example before. 2 people have climbed a mountain. If you've done a mountain trek, it's not easy. You get blisters in your feet, you slip, it gets cold, it's tiring. But if one person's blindfolded and the other person isn't, it's a very different experience. You're both climbing the same hill, you're both climbing the same mountain. But one has clarity on why. One has clarity on why they're going, where they're going. They're motivated by the idea that if I sacrifice here, that go through the difficulty, I'll have a good view at the top of the mountain. The other person's, why me? Why is it happening to me? Why am I slipping? Why is it getting increasingly more difficult? Why? And so the only difference is the belief system, awareness, perspective. That's it. And it has massive effect. Even in mental health, they said 90% of poor mental health is just incorrect beliefs. And a lot of it is reprogramming those beliefs. So we don't appreciate belief. We just think it's religion. Massive impact on your psyche, massive impact on how you experience the world. Right? What you said.
I think that is a wonderful place to, a message to end this conversation. I do look forward to many more. Alhamdulillah. I personally found it extremely beneficial. We touched upon so many different things. But I think the message is very clear, which is let us take external clues to remind us of the most fundamental questions about who we are and why we're here, and figure out how we can benefit ourselves through those external events on which we have no control over. So that is what I'm taking away today, as well as many other fantastic nuggets. And appreciate everybody joining us. Jazakallah khair. And do let us know if you want to see more of these conversations. We'll be very glad to bring them to you, inshallah. So we'll end it there. Subhanakallahumma wa bihamdik. Ashhadu an la ilaha illa anta astaghfiruka wa atubu